We'll get started. Bonnie Fleischauer is our speaker today, and she has a degree in communication. But her claim to fame is the Concordia Cemetery, and they'll tell us, we're going there afterwards. She's going to tell us the history of all that afterwards. And we'll see some digging. Hopefully, they're working today out there, bringing up some old stones. She's like chief cook and bottle washer at the cemetery. They're a wonderful group. They're all volunteer, which is really an amazing thing what your group does. So anyway, Bonnie, without much ado.
Sure. I forgot to put the heat on, so the heat's on.
I don't think you can hear.
Numbers as early as 1820. Following the introduction of the United Church Agenda in Prussia by Frederick Wilhelm III, many evangelical Lutherans fled Germany. The United Church was an attempt to bring together the various Protestant belief systems into one church. During the 1830s, many Protestants who wished to remain true to their own secular beliefs immigrated to America. The famine of 1846 and 1847 and the resulting revolution in 1848 led to increased numbers fleeing Germany. Nearly 7,000 Germans were living in Buffalo in 1850. By 1855, the city was half German, and one of every 100 German immigrants in America lived in Buffalo's east side. Although large numbers of immigrants from other countries continued to come, by the turn of the century, Buffalo was 2/5 German. The Germans who settled in Erie County held fast to their Germans, as they did in other parts of the country. Germans in Buffalo formed a strong cultural group that remained close-knit into the first decades of the 1900s. They consciously tried not to melt into American culture, and they used their language as the carrier of their traditions. Children of immigrants remained bilingual, usually being more fluent in German than in English. German immigrants celebrated freedom of the press, something not allowed in the monarchy in which they had just fled. Several German language newspapers offered different political views. They were Democratic, Republican, Whig, and Socialist, and they thrived in Buffalo. The first German newspaper in Buffalo, and probably you guys can pronounce this better than me, Der Weltbürger, meaning the World Citizen, was published on December 2nd, 1837. Over the next 50 years, more than 20 German language papers focusing on religion, work, and politics would come and go in Buffalo. The sheer numbers of these papers proved the community's determination to keep their German language alive. German clubs, such as the German Young Men's Association, was established on May 10, 1841, as a German English literary society. A library was established with a collection of literary, scientific, and general cultural materials, theatrical presentations, and social gatherings at which literature, art, and science were discussed. The library had over 2,000 volumes, mostly German works. The immigrants who formed athletic clubs, such as the Buffalo Turverein, thank you. An early gymnastics club, which is still active in the area today, and now they are known as the Turners. They formed theater and singing societies such as the Deutsche Liedertafeln, of which John Stellwagen was a member. At least when we get to the tour this afternoon at Concordia, we will tell you about how important John Stellwagen is to both. And that was established on May 9, 1848. Its offshoot, the Orpheus Singing Society, I got that one right, which was founded by 19 members who left the Liedertafel in 1868, and the Deutscher Sägerbund, established in April 20th, 1853. These groups perpetuated the use of their homeland language, celebrated their culture, and helped maintain the community's solidarity. In fact, in the 1870s, demands to teach the German language in Buffalo's high school led to the Common Council hiring 10 teachers to do just that. The German community's influence grew as it did its population. In 1878, of the 3,700 children born in this city, 2,000 of them were German. They built theaters and libraries, breweries, bakeries, and grocery stores, and even founded their own bank, the German American Bank. Remembering the bank failures of 1859, they were distrustful of placing their money in banks owned by others. So they opened their own, the German American Bank, in 1872 at Main and Fort Streets. They set up benefit societies to help widows, orphans. St. John's Evangelical Orphanage was set up in 1864. The elderly, the Evangelical Lutheran Home in Cheektowaga, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and supported each other in times of need. They recognized the need for a hospital on the east side, and plans started in 1895 to build one. The cornerstone was laid in 1899, and the German hospital opened in 1901 on Genesee Street near Jefferson, supported totally by donations and fundraisers, including an annual ball. All services were free. All denominations and people were welcome and cared for. They also kept their culture alive by celebrating festivals and traditional holidays. German Day, October 6th, which we now call Oktoberfest, May celebrations, Johannes festivals for St. John the Baptist Day, Schützenfests, which were shooting competitions, Sangerfests, singing competitions, and festivals that commemorated great Germans like Friedrich von Schiller or Alexander von Humboldt. Perhaps the best known display was the nationwide one-time peace celebration commemorating the close of the Franco-German War by the Peace Treaty of 1871. The Queen City of the Great Lakes hosted her Jubilee on May 9, 1871, and it is remembered as one of the grandest festivals ever undertaken by the German community here. The American press was full of praise for the festival. The Buffalo Courier wrote the following: "The peace celebrated by our German fellow citizens yesterday was full of significance. The spectacle was presented by the vast procession was such as could be presented in no other country. Nowhere else can there be found so numerous a body of expatriated Germans as in the United States. From no other country go out to the fatherland so many impulses of sympathy and love, and in no other country would such an open demonstration of foreign nationality have passed off so peacefully, if indeed it had been permitted at all. Those who participated carry themselves as sustained by a consciousness, not only that the occasion was their own, but that while rejoicing as Germans, they had still greater cause for doing so in the fact that they were American citizens. The whole demonstration seemed to us to afford a justification of the American policy of welcoming all nations. It showed most conclusively that the instinct of nationality is not in conflict with true citizenship." However, in spite of their allegiance to their own community, these early Germans were quick to come to the defense of their new country when called upon. As soon as the Civil War began, Germans in Erie County answered the call to protect and defend their new homeland. Buffalo's German Americans built the ranks, the Western New York-based 67th, 74th, 65th, 21st, 116th, 187th regiments, and the 49th New York Infantry Regiment, whose memorial here is at Spotsylvania. And of course, the famous Battery I of the 1st New York Light Artillery, better known as Weidrich's Battery, which was originally a militia battery attached to the 65th Regiment, New York State Militia of Buffalo. A monument at Gettysburg honors this unit. The battery was comprised 100% of German Americans from Western New York and was credited with turning the tide of the Battle of Gettysburg when they held Cemetery Hill against the Louisiana Tigers. Those early people who came to rest at Concordia were not the politicians or wealthy business owners or industrialists. They are the common man, the hard workers who actually built Buffalo. It is to these people that Concordia pays homage, where their lives are memorialized. The book Buffalo and its German Community summarizes perfectly. It says, you'd be hard pressed trying to find a portion of the city which hasn't been touched by German industrialists. Where is there a house or a mansion which hasn't benefited from German sweat? Where isn't there a workplace or a factory which isn't tied to German skill, or an art or educational facility which isn't influenced by German diligence? It is not through the introduction of music is it not true? The introduction of music festivals, banquets, and wholesome family entertainment that we have contributed a worthy bit of culture. The German who knows that being truly German is not disparate from being truly American will recognize his obligation to retain the heritage of his past as a legacy from his ancestors. Each generation must take part in this cultural work, or as our ancestors have done, so that neither the German community nor the future have reason for anxiety. The German Americans' resistance to assimilate into the mainstream and their adherence to traditions led to suspicions and anti-German sentiment. After all, they were the largest ethnic group in America. The 1910 US Census reported more than 8 million first and second generation German Americans and 2.3 million German born in a population of 92 million. Traditions such as beer halls, which were more social club than bar, families would go to church Sundays, then to the halls to socialize. This custom was looked down upon by established Americans who disapproved of drinking on the Sabbath and put in conflict with the growing temperance movement. However, the biggest collision was over language. German was the most studied foreign language in America. And then World War I. World War I began with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. When news of the war reached the United States in August 1914, immigrants from all over Europe reacted with sympathy and concern for the citizens of their home countries. Some rushed to German consulates in the US in an effort to return home and join the fight. German Americans also held patriotic meetings in cities such as New York and Chicago and collected for war. Such enthusiastic war fever was prevalent among all immigrant groups, but since people of German origin made up such a high percentage of the American population, they came under heightened public scrutiny. The reaction of German Americans to the war varied, however. That was to be expected given their regional, political, and religious diversity. By 1914, the vast majority of German Americans, were American-born descendants of earlier immigrants. Although many of them strongly sympathized with their relatives of the old fatherland, they identified firstly as American and thus wanted to stay out of the war. Most of their fellow Americans shared this attitude, along with President Woodrow Wilson, who immediately declared the country's neutrality. Before long, however, the news from Europe began to divide the country. Reports that German soldiers had committed atrocities against Belgian civilians circulated widely and gave rise to anti-German sentiment in the United States. On May 7, 1915, the Lusitania, a British passenger steamer, was torpedoed by a German submarine off the Irish coast, resulting in the loss of nearly 1,200 lives. That included 124 Americans. The situation for German Americans worsened immediately. Most Americans viewed the sinking of the Lusitania as an unscrupulous German attack on civilians and an act of cold-blooded murder. Thereafter, many, if not most, German Americans identified the German culture, okay, with destruction and barbarism, and they regarded Germans as uncivilized brutes and Huns. In another event, Germans blew up Black Tom Island munitions in the New York Harbor in July 1916. Theodore Roosevelt, still influential influential after leaving the presidency in 1906 added to the suspicions. He said, "There is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism." He stated in a speech on October 1st, 1915. 1916 witnessed the growth of preparedness campaigns and patriotic society. The National Security League and American Defense Society formed to stress the importance of preparing for self-defense if the U.S. goes to war. They demanded compulsory military training in schools, an end to foreign language instruction, and 100% Americanism, which meant patriotism, loyalty, and unwavering support for the government. The Zimmerman telegram was a secret diplomatic communication that was intercepted by Britain and issued from the German Foreign Office in January 1917 that proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico. If the U.S. entered World War I against Germany, Mexico would recover Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. When the United States declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson faced a reluctant nation. Wilson had, after all, won his re-election in 1916 with the slogan, "He kept us out of the war." In order to mobilize Americans behind the war effort, so-called patriotic organizations and the federal government alike employed anti-German propaganda. President Woodrow Wilson appointed journalist George Creel to head the newly created Committee on Public Information, called the CPI, which was tasked with strengthening the war effort by rallying the public behind the government through speeches, posters, films, and door-to-door campaigns. The fear of spies grew when Americans were warned to be watchful of their neighbors of German descent and to report any suspicious person to the authorities. It was rumored that spies were poisoning food, that the German Americans were secretly hoarding arms. The situation was only made worse by newspapers and government officials, both of which fed the public's paranoia. Many Americans started to look twice at their colleagues and neighbors. Patriotism and loyalty could only be proven by buying Liberty bonds, donating to the American Red Cross, participating in parades, and joining the armed forces. Any form of dissent was considered pro-German, and thus was unpatriotic. Creel and Wilson could see the popular enthusiasm for the war was nowhere near white hot. So on June 14, 1917, Wilson used the occasion of Flag Day to paint a picture of American soldiers about to carry the Stars and Stripes into battle and die on fields soaked in blood. And for what? He asked. In calling for a declaration of war, he had argued that the world must be made safe for democracy. But in his 1917 Flag Day speech, he focused on the country's sights on a less exalted goal, the destruction of the government of Germany, which was bent on world domination. This is where he fueled the fire by proclaiming, "The military masters of Germany have filled our unsuspecting communities with vicious spies and conspirators." He declared, "Any man who carries a hyphen about with him carries a dagger that he is ready to plunge into the vitals of this republic when he gets ready." After Flag Day, the CPI began plastering the country with lurid posters of ape-like German soldiers, some with bloody bayonets, killing women and children, or invading U.S. shores, and they funded films with titles like The Prussian Curse and The Kaiser, the Beast of Berlin. Anti-German hysteria even spread to canines. In Columbus, Ohio, officials slaughtered all dogs belonging to German
Or
police.
3:00.
And I bet that when this is all over, that's the only thing you
Unless we're supposed to come over later, but I don't know what time.
After war was declared, President Wilson immediately proclaimed all German citizens alien enemies. They were barred from living near military facilities or airports, in all port towns, and in the nation's capital. They had to disclose their bank accounts and any other property to an alien property custodian who was appointed by the Attorney General. Furthermore, in 1918, an estimated 250,000 Germans had to fill out registration affidavits, which they had to carry with them at all times, and they had to be fingerprinted. German citizens in America who failed to comply with these rules or who were considered potentially dangerous were placed in internment camps for the duration of the war. Some 6,300 aliens were arrested. The internment camps at Hot Springs in North Carolina accommodated most of the 2,300 employees of German passenger and merchant ships. About 1,300 German Navy personnel were kept at Fort McPherson in Georgia. All other suspects, they came from academics, journalists, business people, and artists, were brought to Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia. About 1,400 for the duration of the war. These included noted geneticist Richard Goldschmidt, Hans Grunwald, and concertmaster of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, 29 musicians from the Boston Symphonic Orchestra, and their musical director, Carl Muck. Fort Douglas in Utah was used for approximately 500 prisoners of war, but soon also included more than 800 alien enemies and about 200 American conscientious objectors. The propaganda issued by CPL let loose a riptide of hatred and paranoia and emboldened thousands to use patriotism as an excuse for violence. Thousands of self-appointed guardians of patriotism formed extra-legal vigilance organizations known as the Knights of Liberty, the American Rights League, Boy Spies of America, America Defense Society, Sedition Slammers, National Security League, and the Terrible Threats. They sought to ensure America's full participation in the war effort, often through measures of intimidation, harassment, surveillance, and outright violence. By far, though, the largest of these hyper-patriotic organizations was the American Protective League, or APL, which maintained a network of branches in more than 600 cities. Like other groups, the APL worked to enforce patriotism and stifle dissent. Unlike these other bodies, however, the APL's actions were carried out with the approval of the U.S. government, of justice, and the U.S. Attorney General Thomas Gregory, who applauded their actions. He also helped frame the unconstitutional Espionage and Sedition Acts, which limited the rights of free speech and the press. So with the consent of the Department of Justice, the American Protective League's untrained volunteer civilian members, many of whom wore official-looking badges reading Secret Service, undertook vigilante actions against supposedly disloyal socialists, pacifists, and immigrants. They engaged in domestic surveillance operations. They raided businesses, meeting halls, and private homes in an effort to uncover pro-German sympathizers, and bullied citizens who it was believed were less than fully committed to the country's war efforts. To join APL, you had to take an oath. You received your official ID. They had regular plated a badge that cost 50 cents. The gold plated badge that you just saw cost $3. And then you got to receive the publication, The Spyglass, and that costed $1. On February 2nd, 1917, a Chicago businessman named Albert M. Briggs arrived at the city's Justice Department. Briggs, the vice president of an advertising agency, tried to persuade Hinton D. Clabaugh, superintendent of the Chicago office, to organize a unit of citizen detectives to police the home front. Clabaugh embraced the idea. After receiving the consent of city and state officials, Clabaugh gave Briggs authorization to recruit agents and get informants. Over the next month, In consultation with PalAm and the Bureau of Investigation, Briggs drafted a formal memo proposing a volunteer organization to aid the Bureau of Investigation of the Department of Justice in combating internal subversion. Thus, on March 22nd, 1917, the American Protective League was born. To modern minds, this scenario lands somewhere between absurd and chilling. Yet America in 1917 lacked the resources to deal with potential subversion. The Bureau of Investigation had only 219 agents nationwide with limited powers for arrest and investigation. From left to right, we have Charles Daniel Fry, Albert M. Briggs, and Victor Erkling. Briggs in the center used his business contacts to create a national spy network, creating service divisions across the country. He enlisted the help of Charles Daniel Fry, who's there on the left, a Denver native who was a journalist, educator, and an Army intelligence captain, and Victor Erkling on the right, an attorney active in the Chicago social scene. These three men became APL's national directors, heading an organization that would soon claim 200,000 to 250,000 operatives in 600 cities. So the stacker raids were what came next, the draft out. The raids began in Pittsburgh that March and slowly spread across the country, with major assaults occurring in Cleveland and Minneapolis. In Chicago, APL detectives proved particularly aggressive, stopping men on the street, intercepting trains and automobiles, even entering private homes. Nearly 150,000 men were questioned, 16,000 were arrested, and 1,465 were convicted of draft evasion or desertion. The APL's biggest operation in New York City on September 3rd, 1918, where hundreds of APL detectives, local police, and federal agents descended upon the city. They blocked off subway cars and streets. They raided bars, businesses, and theaters, and forced men to produce draft cards and registrations. Within a few hours, they arrested nearly 40,000 men. The raids dragged on well into the evening with tens of thousands of men, guarded by a few hundred soldiers, awaiting assessment by local draft officials. Eventually, 300 men were imprisoned in the Tombs for draft evasion, allowing Bureau officials to boast that 5% of their victims were indeed guilty. The second day of raiding nearly yielded violence when Brooklyn commuters resisted arrest efforts. Nonetheless, 500 of their number and 4,000 across New York ended the day in custody. The slacker drive that was scheduled in Buffalo was canceled due to criticisms of the New York City raids. Instead, registration booths were set up at industrial locations and offices. So really, I was not able to find much of anything that happened in Buffalo. The only thing I could find was the name of the APL chief, who was A.B. Wright. But nothing was reported, violence in the papers or any reports that I could find. Okay, other things APL were to do. Spy and report on anyone hoarding supplies, sugar, grain, or food, or voicing anti-war sentiments. So they received a number of letters from neighbors. They roamed the streets with baseball bats in Cleveland, demanded to see registration naturalization papers, and checked who did not buy war bonds and report them. Generally harass any German Americans for any behavior that they judged to be unpatriotic, including any rumors. Even the most casual expression of doubt about the war could trigger a beating by a mob and the humiliation of being made to kiss the flag in public. Americans who declined to buy Liberty bonds sometimes awoke to find their homes streaked with yellow paint. Several churches of pacifist sects were set ablaze. Scores of men suspected of disloyalty were tarred and feathered. Like this gentleman. This is John Mates of Laverne, Minneapolis. He was accused of not buying war bonds, and he was tarred and feathered on August 19, 1918. The demonization of German Americans took its ugliest turn in Collinsville, Illinois, when a mob accused Robert Prager, this gentleman, an outspoken German immigrant coal miner, of being a spy. They stripped him naked, put a rope around his neck, paraded him down the main street, made him kiss the American flag and sing patriotic songs. Then they lynched him. 11 men were put on trial for the murder, but all were acquitted. The APL was disbanded after the armistice was signed in 1919. So the impact, though, stayed long after the war. The impact on our German heritage moves. World War I and its anti-German hysteria had a devastating effect on German Americans' cultural and their heritage. American Defense Society, an offshoot of the National Security League, encouraged the burning of German language books. A campaign to change the names of cities, streets, and buildings. By 1918, 38 of 48 states restricted or banned German language instruction. The book burnings that we just mentioned. Orchestras were no longer performing works by Bach, Beethoven, Mendelssohn, or Wagner. The German language newspapers could not get advertisers, so most of them failed. Many of the German societies either shut down or changed their names. Cities' names were changed. Berlin, Michigan became Marv in honor of those who fought in that battle. Berlin, Ohio became Fort Laramie. Germantown, Tennessee became Neshoba. Berlin, Iowa was changed to Lincoln. German street names were changed. In Cincinnati, Berlin was changed to Woodward, and German Street was changed to English Street. In Chicago, Lubeck, Frankfurt, and Hamburg became Dickens, Charleston, and Shakespeare. In New Orleans, Berlin became Pershing. In Buffalo, Rhine Street became Bissell, and German Street became Sherman. In Buffalo, the German bank became Liberty Bank, and the German hospital was renamed.
World War One changed the names from German to English.
Can you mute yourself, please? Thanks.
German words and phrases also changed. Frankfurters became hot dogs. Okay. German shepherds became Alsatians. Dachshunds became Liberty dogs. Sauerkraut became Liberty cabbage.
Dachshund became a Liberty Bell dog.
I don't have any here.
Oh.
Here.
Probably the weirdest one of all. German measles was renamed Liberty measles. And many of you have your German research and your genealogies have become aware that the Americanization of the German names to conceal their ethnic background. You'll see that in censuses as you go forward. Then shown first in post-war censuses from 1910 to 1920, censuses of about 900,000 German-born Americans seemingly vanished, only to reappear under the categories of American-born or a different ethnicity. I've seen a lot that now say they were born in Elsa. Come across that.
Going at Persian Street, which was Berlin Street, so up road. I remember my grandma was okay with that, she was Persian. So, and I never found genealogy on your parents' papers. And
Tom?
Yeah.
Could they have any questions repeated somehow?
and everyone
We
was.
can't hear them.
She's just talking right now.
Okay.
And so, very interesting. The thing is that Pershing Street was in the German fruit belt area, and so everyone around there was German, and so we went to those stores, those bakeries, and so they kind of made the thing around them. But and I think that's why Buffalo was
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I was great grandfather Daniel J-U-N-G, and his brother was Peter Y-O-U-N-G. But that's just the beginning of it, because Daniel, my great grandfather, was being investigated by the OSS, trying to see the FBI. I may have been wrong, but I found out it was on whole free. They were going to his house, checking on him because there were a lot of people coming and going. And I know he was head of a bank, he was head of a lot of Bavarian society, so he may have released, he may not have. In 1917, he applied for an emergency passport to go to Germany. He went to Nuremberg when his family was in Rhineland Falls, so it's like going to New York instead of California. But there's an article in April of 1917. No disloyalty in Peter Y-O-U-N-G. Genesee Street merchant speaks to defend himself against mischievous gossip. Says others suffer too. Writes to the mayor in the Express regarding stories he has heard. Since the declaration of war, there have been reports from time to time that citizens of German descent in Buffalo have been placed under arrest or surveillance for alleged disloyalty. Peter Young, the clothing merchant, called Mayor Furman's attention to this form of gossip yesterday, and in a letter asked the mayor to make a statement to the newspapers, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Young said it has been rumored that he has insulted the U.S. flag. In a public letter, he offers to give $1,000 to any charity if anyone can be found to substantiate stories that have been circulated questioning his loyalty. And it goes on and on. But the following day, the whole thing was rescinded. But isn't that something? And it goes two sides of the family. We never knew the Peter Young side of the family. So, I mean, there was kind of bad blood. So, because one was very pro-American, I'm inclined to think that my great-grandfather may not have been.
I wonder if the reason why Buffalo didn't experience the Cleveland experience was because a lot of the city officials were German. Yes. And our mayor was German right through the 1930s and 40s. I wonder if in Cleveland that was true. I wonder what the reality were. But I thought the reason, and obviously, I guess, that the reason why Buffalo didn't do this is German. There was too many Germans around, and they didn't want to rock the boat. But I wonder if we could dig up anything from the common council records that asked for peace or asked for calming. I guess they had to have discussed this in the common council records.
1916 to 19, Aaron Davis, followed by Fitzgerald. Cleveland. Yeah, it was really fascinating. I mean, I think when I wrote papers when I was in high school about how Japanese Americans were during World War II, and how you were given American Indians were given first love in certain places by the American government and whatever. But nobody made as much of how much in World War I, which is interesting. Maybe just that time expands. What goes around comes around. Things are nasty today amongst different leaders. But I mean, there was nothing much worse than World War I, how the Germans were treated here. Go on.
I was just gonna mention World War II. Now you're really a sympathy more, and Germans, in the army, when you're looking, I know my mother's one cousin. Was interpreter. So if he spoke German as he did, because my mother did not speak English, so she went to school, and that was, they had school, and they still spoke German. She really didn't speak English, you know, until she was. But, so they went to war, and I know that her cousin, who just had graduated, was sent out to Germany by that time, and so it was the end of the war in East Germany, and he was wounded and taken to the hospital only because he spoke German to the German soldiers who captured him, took him to a hospital, and in that hospital, I remember him telling me, he was asked, why are you fighting against the Father in the German hospital? He said, you are wrong. The Hitler is not a good man, you know, doing wrong. He's democracy. And that stuck with me the whole time. And when he was captured, my mother's aunt received the letter, missing in action. She don't know what's going on. And having so distraught, it took months till she got a telegram finally when they took over from him that he was alive. But that sticks to me too. It's like, it was a rough time for all of them. But by that time, World War II, we were so accepted, and we were, you know, Germans who spoke the language used behind, behind the boundaries.
Very poor reception.
So interesting.
So I have
Couple of words.
my daughter has an uncle
Understand.
who immigrated in like
From New York.
and Alexander, that's one that were on there too. And I can remember going out to visit them in the sixties, he was talking about during the war, where the guys in their big fancy city cars, like 3-4 of them at a time, that drive a long driveway to the farm. And he said they all had their suits and their hats on, and they would get out, they opened doors, they just marched in the house, marched in the barn. They were looking for radios, they actually were censoring their mail. And I don't know who they were doing, but somebody from the government was watching all of the German farmers out there. And just walk right in, pull right in unannounced, walk right in their houses in their gardens and looking if they're hiding somebody, what radio station, what newspapers they're reading. Yeah, where their mail was coming from. I received this email, kind of timely, just this week from an organization that I belong to. And it has to do with, I'll read a little bit. When World War II began in September 1939, German Americans once again became suspects, and many were deemed less than because of their ethnic ancestry. The proposed, okay, we go on. Although it may seem difficult to believe, the U.S. federal government deliberately curtailed people of German ancestry's freedom of movement through restrictions, registrations, arrests, exclusions, internment, exchanges, and even deportation. 300,000 Americans were labeled as potentially dangerous enemy aliens, and over 11,000 German Americans were interned. Now, this is World War II. Yeah, the largest of these internment camps was located in Crystal City, Texas. And I looked a little bit into the email, and there's actually news in out here in Austin, Texas about this. And the U.S. Department of State even chartered an ocean liner with the official mission was to bring Japanese and German nationals to exchange points, followed by picking up U.S. and Canadian citizens with the goal of returning them to the United States and Canada and repatriating American POWs. However, what they did was they deported German Americans to other places, including people who were born here but of German, ancestry. And they, however, the deportees were not just German nationals, but included naturalized and even American-born citizens. And then remember at that time, after the wars and stuff, like World War I and II, a lot of Germans left Germany and they went to Central America, South America, and even Australia and stuff. So the US government also worked with several Latin American nations to have their residents of German, Italian, and Japanese ancestry deported and sent to the United States so they could be interned. So in 1988 and 1999, the US federal government formally recognized the internment of Japanese and Italian Americans respectively. But they have yet to formally acknowledge what they did to the Germans. So there is a bill going through Congress called the Wartime Violation of German American Civil Liberties Act of 2022, whereby if this bill passes, they will formally, I guess, acknowledge what they did to the German Americans' heritage at World War II. So quite interesting. There's some books here. I mean, it goes on. If anybody's interested, I'll forward it, let me know, and I can forward it to you. Children of Internment, German American attorneys. There's been some reunions of these people that were interred. A museum, the Bullock Museum, all sorts of stuff. It's room. Yeah, it's with yeah. So crazy how we all get so crazy.
I forgot to mention, back to my great grandfather on Tennessee. There was a newspaper, a local one called the Honorable Recycling, and there was a national one, Workers' Day. Whoever was in charge of the national one, his name escapes me, came to visit more than once. And someone reported to this OSS, whatever it was, that the national guy's wife told someone that she had a list of 500 German Americans and Americans Buffalo who were still loyal to Germany. Would you love to see that list? Because it still exists.
Well, I can back a ways. I was just, I don't know if this is actually true, but I've always heard the story. I'm talking about, not story, but idea. And this is going back to like the 1870s, 1860s. The German immigrants being German, the minute they were eligible to apply for citizenship, they did 5 years to the point. Was that typical of just this area, or was it, that was true all over the United States? I mean, I'm wondering if that's the reason why there wasn't as much of a problem here in the Buffalo area.
I know that when my grandparents came and great grandparents, there were already cousins here, so you had, some families sent their oldest son and they worked, and that's why you have in Buffalo telescopic homes, which is on the east side, on your way to Concordia, you will see them, they're a house, but then you see this built on, and then you see another built on section, we call them telescopic homes, and they were for the families that were coming, so my grandfather came first, and he sent money home until the rest of the family come. And so I think, and he became a citizen first, so I think they helped each other. That's what I'm thinking, and it was easier. And again, like Michael said, you had Germans who was, in fact, they were, our tax collectors. That's what we're today. They were deeds people. You see all these German names if you go into the Buffalo records from years ago. So they helped, it's like at Ellis Island where they had, these German groups, and they'd have, from Italian groups too, came in to help, translate and help them get on the right road to where they were going. But you had to know somebody. So you had somebody that in case you came in with $30, like my grandfather, you had somebody that was gonna back you up in Buffalo. You had a place to stay, and you already had a job. Someone was talking about that too. Oh, Michael, They came on a Friday and worked on Monday. That's how my grandfather had Pier Zero. He had a job already lined up. because, Yeah, they had more power to become. I think if you went out west or whatever, maybe there weren't as many Germans, but Buffalo was a German. And that's where, when you go to come to Concordia, that section of Buffalo is called Germantown.
Any other comments?
Any other stories?
Stories, yeah.
Stories.
Stories.
Your parents told or that about years.
Huh?
My mother was a little child during World War I in southern Indiana, and she told me that all the kids learned Kaiser Bill went up the hill. That song. You know, clearly, and this is, and, you know, and this is a family with some German blood, right? And you know, it's all anti-German.
German was the language, so. They teach it now, but, you know, of course I took it because my mother would help me. And the first thing the German teacher said was, "Mom, did you?" And I got up and closed the door. That's the only thing I knew, because that's what my grandma always said, and everybody's, and they said, "Oh my God, she knows German." I didn't.
My father always said he took German in high school because he thought it would be an easy A. He said the hot Deutsch was that like hot Deutsch. He much an easy A. We took German classes at internationally. They used to get here. Actually, that's where my friend was from him. A German couple. They met here. So, go ahead.
I heritage is limited as Italian and it's German, but my mother and my aunts were all bankers during World War II. My one aunt worked in a bank down at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. She did Navy payroll with the name of Barata. She had to change her name to Barrett so that she sounded English and could keep her job. That was a very same place for an Italian to be working. Oh, good job.
You mentioned that many German language newspapers went out of business because of lack of advertising. One of the other factors were the passing of the Espionage and Sedition Acts in 17 and 18, where you had to submit any article in a foreign language newspaper that even remotely, covered politics or war before it could be published. And that made it very difficult to publish a newspaper. Many of them couldn't comply.
Anti-freedom press.
Yeah.
Okay, so